Okay, so dito na tayo sa Module 2, Nationalism and Patriotism. I-chat nyo kapag nag-choppy ako ha. Okay, learning outcomes for this module. So at the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify and discuss the concepts and characteristics that differentiate nationalism and patriotism. So, i-differentiate natin, di-discuss natin sila isa-isa. And then trace and comprehend the origin of nationalism and patriotism in the Philippine context. Okay, discuss muna natin ang definition ng nationalism. So few concepts have gone through as many transformations of connotation as nationalism. The word itself in English goes back in common usage only to 1844, though it is argued that the proposition that the English people were a nation dawned with the Tudors in the late 15th century. So, yung mismo paggamit ng word, sinasabi, it only started in 1844. Although may mga nag-argue na 15th century pa daw siya nagsimulang gamitin. In ancient Rome, the word nation actually meant litter as in a cat's progeny, as in pupo ng pusa. Yun. And referred to foreigners and migrants who were deemed subhuman by Roman citizens. Kasi, uh, so citizens, yung mga hindi Roman citizens, of course, dahil nga hindi sila Roman citizens, they are foreigners. During that time, dun nga sa ancient Rome, ang tawag sa kanila ay, yun, nasyo. Nasyo ang tawag sa kanila, meaning litter, yung pupo ng pusa. But the term gradually lost its implications of contempt and began to refer to a community of shared opinion. Then the Latin roots natio and natus both came from nascor or I am born, whose perfect form is natus sum. I have been born. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng natus sum. Okay. Nasho and Natus point to the fact that to the ancient Romans, Nasho was merely a group of people who were associated by birth conditions, typically of a larger tribe, or a confederacy bestowed by blood, but of those who were not worthy of being deemed Roman citizens. Kumbaga, dati kasi malaking big deal kapag ikaw ay isang Roman citizen. But, kaya may ibang tawag sa mga hindi Roman citizens. Una, yung mga foreigners na nabanggit natin kanina. And then, ngayon, yung tinutukoy dito, yung mga nasyo, it is a tribe. Isa siyang tribo na, kumbaga, magkakalahi lang kayo by blood. Pero, hindi kayo worthy para maging Roman citizens. Kumbaga, nagkataon lang na nandun kayo sa Rome, pero hindi kayo worthy na maging Roman citizens. Yun yung mga nasyo. Interestingly, a nasyo had a specific size dimension to it. Nasyo was larger than a family but smaller than a clan or stirps, and smaller than a people or gens. The Roman philosopher Cicero talks of Jews and Syrians as nationes natae servituti, people born to servitude. In other words, slave. Kumbaga, mga taong na pinanganak para maglingkod, para mag-serve. Yun yung role daw nila. So, nation began to be used in the mid-19th century, yun na nga yung 1844, di ba? As a synonym for devotion to one's country, for advocating its national spirit or aspirations. But in the days of vast empires, the British, the French, the Ottoman, the Austro-Hungarian, this was not necessarily a reputable sentiment, since to be a nationalist was to be against the empire of which one's nation was a part. Ayun. Nationalism rested on an expressed desire for national unity and independence, and this could only be achieved by extracting one's nation from the imperium. Not surprisingly, nationalism was looked askance at by the prevailing orthodoxy of the age. So there were important differences, though, between the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires. On the one hand, that was that were that were consciously multi-ethnic, and the British and the French, who were explicitly developing nationalist models and ideologies at home while imposing their imperiums abroad. Kumbaga, may ibang pagtuturo daw sa kanilang mga tahanan, and then may iba ring mga tinuturo, ayun nga, nationalist models and ideologies na na ina-apply nung kanilang mga imperium. So little African and Asian children in Senegal or Vietnam were taught by the French Empire to dutifully, if absurdly, recite Nos ancêtres les Gaulois, our ancestors, the jails. Assimilation was the name of the imperial game, and it worked both ways. Queen Victoria was, after all, Empress of India. But these were for public consumption. The reality for a colonial subject was of racial separation and racial hierarchy. Dahil nga, um, dati, di ba, uso pa talaga or madami pa ang mga colonies, mga bansa na sinakop ng ibang bansa. Parang tayo, naging colony tayo ng Spain, di ba? And uh, because of that fact, nagkaroon ng iba't ibang pagtuturo, iba't ibang paraan ng pagtuturo ng pagmamahal sa kanilang mga countries. Kumbaga, hindi pa talaga sure kung kanino yung loyalty nila. Kaya nga, ayan o, little African and Asian children na nasa, yun nga, Africa or Asia, Senegal and Vietnam, were taught by French Empire. Yung mga taga-France ang nagtuturo sa kanila. At ito nga, yung isa sa mga pinaparecite sa kanila. Okay. Okay. So historically, the French and American revolutions in the late 18th century were the first to challenge the nation-eroding sweep of the mighty empires that had hitherto been imagined to be the acme of political organization. The Haitian Revolution followed soon after, and at the start of the 19th century. So while the Americans unseated the British Empire that was still in the process of establishing itself around the world, the French defenestrated their own king, challenging the very notion of divine right that had legitimized monarchy and its territorial ambitions. Before, siguro ngayon, ang kino-consider nating pinakamakapangyarihang bansa is US. Kasi andun yung technology, andun nagsisimula ang mga iba't ibang uri ng advancement, 'di ba? But America was not the America before dahil sinakop din sila ng mga ayan nga ng British Empire. Yun nga, habang in-establish pa ng British Empire ang kanilang sarili sa mundo. But then na-unseat din sila ng mga Americans. And yun nga, sabi, the French defenestrated their own king. Kasi kung familiar naman siguro kayo sa monarchy, no? It's a form of government kung saan merong hari at reyna at nakukuha yung position na yon by blood. Kumbaga, meron talagang royal blood na sila lang ang may karapatan na maging hari at reyna, and they considered this as a divine right. Bigay daw yun ng Diyos sa kanila. Kaya nga ito, challenging the very notion of divine right that had legitimized monarchy. Kasi yun nga, Diyos daw ang nag-legitimize ng pagiging hari at reyna ng isang, yun nga, sa monarchy. Ayan. Okay, so patriotism, on the other hand, so within the public life of most countries today, patriotism is regarded as an indispensable virtue. Those who fight to establish free and democratic societies are often called patriots. It is taken for granted that patriotism should be nurtured in public schools. Politicians, especially, guard their claims to patriotism jealously. You can accuse a political rival of dishonesty, corruption, and stupidity, but to question her patriotism, it is thought is beyond the pale. Philosophers who write about patriotism in contrast tend to view it with suspicion. It is not that they reject patriotism altogether, only a relative few go quite that far, but rather that when they endorse patriotism, they tend to attach a long list of qualifications. So, sinasabi dito na ang politicians, kumbaga, pwede mo siyang akusahan ng kung ano-ano, na corrupt siya, na sinungaling siya. Pero kapag sinabi mo daw na hindi siya isang patriot, when you question his or her patriotism, then that is, kumbaga, malaking offense yun. Yun ang sabi nila. So what is patriotism? So in the same way, a patriot has a passion for her country that she does not simply choose to possess and cannot simply choose to eradicate. You may love a country simply because you admire it, perhaps from afar, but a more passionate love is required for patriotism. For example, mahilig ka sa K-pop. So you may say, I love Korea, I love Seoul, yung mga ganon. But it is not outright considered patriotism. Kasi yung pag sinabing patriotism, deep love for your country. Hindi lang yung basta, ang dami kasi, ando kasi yung BTS. Kaya gusto mo yung Korea. Kaya love mo yung Korea. But it's not patriotism. Sabi nga dito, a more passionate love is required for patriotism. Because when you are passionate about something, uh, you can sacrifice for it. Na kahit buhay mo, ibibigay mo. Kaya nga 'di ba, sabi kanina, ang tawag sa mga taong matindi ang pagmamahal sa kanilang bansa are patriots. For example, yung mga sundalo natin, yung mga law enforcement agencies, they risk their lives para lang sa bansa nila, 'di ba? Okay. Patriotic love is essentially the love of what is yours. It is possible to love a foreign country. A Filipino can love American, but you cannot have patriotic love for any country but your own. Talagang, masasabi mo namang pwede mong mahalin yung ibang bansa. Hindi naman mali yun. Pero pag sinabing patriotic love, it's different. Kasi, uh, you can only love what is yours nga. You can only love your own country. O yung Philippines lang. In part, the patriot's commitment to his country is driven by the recognition that this country and no other is his. Ako, Pilipino ako. So, Pilipinas lang ang mabibigyan ko ng ganitong uri ng pagmamahal. Ganun ang ibig sabihin ng patriotic love. So that said, the patriot does not love his country just because it is his or just because he cannot help it. So what is patriotism? So characteristically, the patriot is proud of his country and embraces the special relationship that he shares with it. The patriot may see that his country is far from perfect and may have disagreements with its government, but he thinks of it as a good country. Ang iniisip niya na lang, ang mga may problema sa bansa niya, yung mga tao, but the country itself, um, you have, yun nga, you have a special relationship with it in at least some central respects. The patriot does not wish that he did not love his country and does not wish that he had been born somewhere else. Finally, patriotism involves a serious loyalty to country, not just a mild affection. Yun nga, yung being ready to sacrifice for your country, being ready to fight for your country. That's patriotism. So what is patriotism? So a patriot does not merely cheer for his country's soccer team or enjoy eating its national dish. He is committed to his country and is prepared to make sacrifices for its sake. There is more to say about the love of patriotism. Defining patriotism is no easier than defining love, but those are the main elements of patriotism, and recognizing them as such allows us to begin to make an informed evaluation of patriotism and to contrast it with nationalism. Nationalism versus patriotism. So nationalism and patriotism both show the relationship of an individual towards his or her nation. The two are often confused. Madalas nga napagpapalit yan. And frequently believed to mean the same thing, but magkaiba sila ng definition. However, there is a vast difference between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism and nationalism are taken respectively to mean often whatever is good about an allegiance to a country is called patriotism. Okay, kapag maganda daw na bagay patungkol sa allegiance sa isang bansa, that's called patriotism. And whatever is bad about it is called nationalism. They are nationalists. We are patriots. Kaiba daw yun. It may be said, for example, that a patriot wants his country to flourish, while a nationalist wants his country to dominate all others. Paano natin gagawin example? Pag sinabi natin patriot, gusto daw niya mag-flourish yung kanyang country, yung makilala ang country nila, hindi yung manakop sila ng ibang country. Kumbaga, yun nga, maipakilala ano bang maganda sa Pilipinas, ano bang maganda ah, na tanawin sa Pilipinas, ano ba yung kultura sa isang lugar. But a nationalist would want na ang kikilalanin lang din ng ibang bansa ay yung bansa nila. Kasi nga, they want to dominate all other countries. Yun ang sinasabi, di ba? So, that is an unhelpful way to draw the distinction. However, because it presupposes too much about the value of patriotism as compared to nationalism, a definition of the terms should leave room for the possibility that nationalism is sometimes defensible and that patriotism sometimes is not. Another common way of distinguishing nationalism from patriotism is more helpful. Patriotism and nationalism, it can be said, have different objects. The patriot and the nationalist direct their love at different kinds of things. The patriot loves a country, real or prospective, and the nationalist loves a nation. Okay ba yun? A country is a territory governed by a state, and a nation is a people defined by a shared background and identity. Sometimes a country and a nation are regarded as one. Often, the goal of the nationalist is to see her nation become a self-governing entity with its own territory, a nation that coincides with a state. Often, it is in the interests of a state to forge a national identity among the people it governs, to transform a mere citizenry into a nation. So, a nationalist would want a nation, sabi nga dito, to become self-governing. Yung hindi na siya aasa sa iba, sa ibang bansa. Gets ngayon? Pag nationalist ka, ayaw mo tumangkilik ng iba. Pag nationalist ka, Pilipinas lang. Hindi tayo kukuha, hindi tayo hihingi ng kahit anong tulong sa ibang mga bansa. Hindi tayo tatangkilik ng mga bagay na galing sa ibang bansa. That's a nationalist. But a patriot is not that. Kumbaga, mahal niya yung country niya, but still, tumatangkilik naman siya ng tumatangkilik siya ng ibang bansa, pero ang pagmamahal niya, nandun lang sa bansa niya. Yung patriot love na tinatawag natin kanina pa. Okay, so as a result, the lines between patriotism and nationalism are often blurred in practice. Kasi nga, di ba, hindi masyadong malalim yung distinction. But still, the distinction is there in principle. The patriot loves a country, the nationalist loves a people. Patriotism and nationalism raise many of the same moral and political issues, but differences between them need to be kept in mind. One point is especially worth noting. The natural accompaniment to the concept of patriotism is the concept of citizenship. You become a member of a state by becoming a citizen. Diba? You are, yun na nga, magiging formally part ka ng isang country kung citizen ka doon. And, of course, may iba't ibang privileges ang pagiging citizen. The natural accompaniment to the concept of nationalism is the concept of identity. To be a member of a nation is to have a certain heritage and to be understood as a saan ako? Participant in a specified intergenerational community. It is a matter of degree, but discussions of patriotism are more likely to lead into discussions about the needs of the state, while discussions of nationalism are more likely to lead into discussions about the construction of individual personhood. Again, pag sinabi nating patriotism kasi, eto yung pagmamahal mo sa country mo. Ang nationalism is pagmamahal doon sa people of the country. Kaya nga sabi, uh, patriotism would likely discuss the needs of the state, and nationalism would likely to discuss uh, individual personhood, construction of individual personhood. Okay, so nationalism means to give more importance to unity by way of a cultural background, including language and heritage. Nationalism implies to a person that his country is most superior among other countries and he will defend it no matter what. Yun na nga yung sinasabi natin kanina, na ang pagiging nationalist ay pagtanggap lang sa sariling bansa at ayaw niya tumanggap ng ibang bansa. And tingin niya, nakahihigit yung bansa niya sa iba. Nationalism etymologically means love, care for, per preservation, and patronage of one's native land and everything in it, the country of birth of a national, whether it be Filipino or otherwise. To be a Filipino nationalist, therefore, the ethnological ramifications of nationalism must all be present in one's being. This implies a heartfelt dedication for the love, care, and preservation of the Philippines and everything that is identified with it. The Philippine territory, the inhabitants, Philippine sovereignty, its government, all things that represent and symbolize the country, the aspirations, hopes, dreams, and the needs of the Filipino people. So, yun yung mga bagay na patungkol sa nationalism. Yung pinipreserve mo lahat ng patungkol sa Pilipinas. Patriotism, on the other hand, pertains to the love for a nation with more emphasis on values and beliefs. One who is patriotic will be ready to make any sacrifice for his country. He will never live selfishly for himself alone. A soldier, for instance, makes the supreme sacrifice of his life for the sake of his country. It was derived from the Greek word patriot, which means fellow countryman, and patris, which means fatherland or country. The term also derives from the word pater, which means father. A patriot is someone who supports and acts in defense of his or her country, and the term generally refers to a concept of national loyalty. So examples are soldiers and peace officers. Yun nga yung mga sabi dito. Ready to make the supreme sacrifice of his life, to give his life for the sake of his country. So when talking about nationalism and patriotism, one cannot avoid the famous quotation by George Orwell, who said that nationalism is the worst enemy of peace. According to him, nationalism is a feeling that one's country is superior to another in all respects. Yun nga, paulit-ulit, na ayaw tumangkilik ng ibang bansa, na ang tingin niya, pinakamagaling na talaga yung bansa niya. That's nationalism. While patriotism is merely a feeling of admiration for a way of life. These concepts show that patriotism is passive by nature and nationalism can be a little aggressive. Patriotism is based on affection, and nationalism is rooted in rivalry and resentment. One can say that nationalism is militant by nature and patriotism is based on peace. Most nationalists assume that their country is better than any other, whereas patriots believe that their country is one of the best and can be improved in many ways. Sana nagigets nyo na yung difference, no? So, patriotism is based on sorry. Patriots tend to believe in friendly relations with other countries while some nationalists don't. Kasi nga, ang tingin ng nationalists, sila lang ang magaling.